Open heart, open mind. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Satwa Channel, an online official platform of the Satwa project. So I'm Samiksha. I'm from Satwa Youth. It is also a program which is initiated by the Satwa project. So before we begin our session today, as usual, I would like to thank Brother Chong. Brother Chong, would you please come on the screen to say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. For those of you who are on Facebook, please do like and share our broadcast so that more can benefit. And those of you watching on YouTube, you have more actions to take. You can like, share, and also subscribe. And hope you enjoy our discussion and dialogue today. Now, back to you, Samisha.
Thank you, Brother Chong. So today we are going to embark a new series entitled Dharma or Drama, Celibacy in Buddhism. So let's get introduced to our contributor and moderator today. So today's program will be moderated by Raymond Lam. Raymond is senior writer at Buddhist Tour Global. He has been a Chinese Buddhist layman since 2008 and began working for the Buddhist Tour organization in 2010. An alumnus of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of Queensland, he is a trustee of the Haythrop Association. Thank you, Raymond, for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, the only female contributor we have today is Venerable Tenzin Dasel. Venerable Tenzin Dasel is a teacher and leader who has been practicing Buddhism and meditation for over 2 decades. She is the founder of Main Mindfulness Project and serves as the Buddhist spiritual advisor at Bates College and the spiritual program coordinator at Tashigatseling Buddhist Center. She holds many honors and distinction for her work with women, children, and youth throughout the US, India, and the world.
Hello.
Wow.
Very happy to be here with everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be, some kind of a representative, I suppose, of one kind of a gender, but just happy to be here as myself to share whatever help or insight or exchange, also to learn and listen. Thank you for the invitation to Sattva. Thank you to everybody who's contributing and who's taking their time to listen online.
Thank you, Venerable Tenzin Dasel. So our next contributor is Venerable Tenzin Peljor. Bhikshu Tenzin Peljor has been studying and practicing Buddhism since 1995 and was fully ordained as a Buddhist monk in 2006 by the Sangha of Namgyal Monastery and His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. He was appointed resident monk for Bodhicharya, Germany in Berlin by Ringu Tulku Rinpoche in 2007, where he served as resident monk and board member for several years. From 2008 to 2013 and from 2017 to 2019, he studied at the Lama Tsongkhapa Institute in Italy for the master's program of Buddhist studies. For 20 years, he has been giving lectures, study and meditation courses on Buddhism and is now a teacher at Tibetus, Germany in Frankfurt im Main. Among other things, he is involved in the penal system and together with an anthropologist has developed a program for children on how to deal with their emotions. For okay, for more information, you can visit the website. Thank you so much, Venerable Tenzin, to join us today.
Hello, Michelle. Nice to meet you and nice to meet all the others. And especially thank you for the invitation and all others who have interest in the conversation about this topic, celibacy, Buddhism, and Dharma. Thank you.
Our next contributor is Venerable T.K. Nagakaki. Venerable Dr. T.K. Nagakaki is a Buddhist priest ordained in the 750-year-old Jodo Shinshu tradition of Japanese Buddhism. He graduated from Rukokuku University in Kyoto, majoring in Buddhist history in 1983, and later conducted advanced study in Jodo Shinshu Buddhist doctrine at Gyoshin Buddhist Seminary in Osaka, Japan from 1983 to 1985. He received an MA in linguistics from California State University at Fresno in 1994 and earned a doctorate of ministry in multi-faith studies from the New York Theological Seminary in 2012. He is currently a president and founder of the Heva Peace and Reconciliation Foundation of New York. He also is a president emeritus of the Buddhist Council of New York, a Hiroshima Peace Ambassador, Nagasaki Peace Correspondent, and honorary board member of the Interfaith Center of New York, and honorary president of Sanghakaya Foundation India, and New York City Police Department clergy license.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Reverend TK, to join us today.
Thank you so much. So looking forward to hearing all of the things, but I already messed up with the time. So that daylight saving time, I guess, so I came here 1 hour before everything started. So I have to leave earlier today, 1 hour. So sorry about that. Yeah.
So our next contributor is Micheal Nolan. Micheal Nolan is a former monk and musician who grew up in Australia and spent several years in the United States. He completed a Bachelor of Science at the University of Queensland with majors in physics and computer science. After university, Micheal worked in computing and also pursued a career as a professional musician. He became interested in Buddhism and took refuge in the Three Gems at a temple of the Fokon-chan order from Taiwan. He later studied with the Rigpa group and was ordained as a Getsul monk in Nepal with Tulshik Rinpoche, who was the head of the Nyingmapa school of Tibetan Buddhism at the time. After 14 years with Rigpa, Micheal left the group and disrobed, citing concerns about abuse and cultic tactics. He has since lived in Thailand and Australia and written about his experiences recovering from and making sense of the abuse he experienced within the Tibetan Buddhist community. Micheal is currently writing a work intended to help people thrive despite spiritual marketing and to remove the stigma of asking important questions before committing to a spiritual teacher or community. Thank you so much, Micheal Nolan, to join us today. You are muted.
It's a privilege to be invited to participate, and I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, so now that we have all our speakers and also moderator here, I hand over this program to Brother Raymond.
Thank you so much, Shamishka. I'm very delighted to be able to be hosting this discussion with so many informed and insightful people about a very core topic that I think is so central and so expected of the Buddhist tradition that we often maybe perhaps feel it more just as background noise rather than something that is for the monastics that choose this kind of choose to be ordained and live this life of spiritual calling. It is something that they experience and embody every day, and that is celibacy. And so I think in this first episode of this series, I think it fitting to start with such an important topic and to perhaps discuss its nuances, its complications, and its, because it's so central, its complexities and tensions. And I think all of us tonight have our own very nuanced and insightful opinions on that. But tonight I'd like to actually start with a tradition that is not so focused on celibacy, which is, as I understand, the Japanese tradition. Reverend TK has to leave us relatively earlier, so we will start with it with you. And now I would venture to say that celibacy, Reverend, is at the heart of what the Buddha at first established in his monastic order. We see it attested to in the early suttas. We see it maintained, as best as it has been for 2,500 years. And we've seen it, riffed on, adapted, and in all sorts of ways historically. What would you see as the Japanese perspective on celibacy, and how did it change? What's going on in your tradition?
Yeah. First of all, yeah. I'm originally from Japan too, so it's like when I grew up, most of monks getting married, have a family. I thought it was actually a surprise, because normally I expect everybody's ordained and get married. I mean, not married, but then in Japan, that was very common. It was the first surprise actually when I started learning Buddhism. But at the same time, there's a history behind, which is like how you see the time. The Buddha was 2,500 years ago exist. So after, there's a understanding of the ages, basically. After first 500 years, the Buddha passed, still alive, and after the passing 500 years, there's a right Dharma age. So they have a teaching, they have people who practice, and they have people who enlighten. Then after that, after 500 years, next 500 years, they call it more like a resembles, of the right Dharma, which is like, it's like the teaching is there, people practice, but yet somehow not be enlightened. That was the image. And then when the Buddhism came to Japan, it's already coming to the next age, which is like a last Dharma age, and which is considered as there's teaching, but yet less people who practice because they can't enlighten anymore. So what do teach? I mean, practice. And so the teaching is there, but then the part of the practice is less, and then the people, nobody enlightened anymore, or something like those are the time that the Buddhism came already in Japan. And actually, one of the Japanese Buddhism, the history begin with Prince Shotoku, who is, of course, a Buddha, considered as a Buddha at that time in Japan. And he brought, even the constitution based upon the Buddhism. And he was married. He has 4 wives. So it was, as you know, the Mahayana tradition tend to be emphasize more lay people's life, like a Vimalakirti, he's a lay person, but then you have a the discussion with monks who they like 10 disciples and so forth. But yet, the things that bringing the Mahayana part of the Buddhism is a lay-oriented life. So lay-oriented means normally married, but yet to be able to understand the Dharma as deep as the the monks, basically monks and nuns. And then even actually interesting part is Prince Shotoku himself was considered a reincarnation of the Shurimara Sutra. Shurimara. She's the woman, and she gave a teaching on behalf of the Buddha, to the disciple of the Buddha. So the Prince Shotoku was considered as the reborn of the Shurimara, and actually the emperor. I mean, he's a prince, so which means he was a position of governing Japan at that time. And then his wife, or actually the emperor, was actually empress, the Suiko, Empress Suiko. So Japan actually started with the female leaders of the emperor, and then sort of like also Shurimara reborn of the people who do the running or the different governing parts, but then the spirituality too. So the first things, the first constitution of the he created is peace is most valuable, and then without no violence. So peace and non-violence is a way of living. And then the second one, in order to do that, we need a kind of guideline how you live, which is a Buddha Dharma Sangha. So those are clearly stated. So the Japan, at least based upon that, this temple it's created. So after that, there's a different school of Buddhism in Japan, but yet somehow everybody going back to the Prince Shotoku, who is a lay people. And my tradition itself is a Pure Land Buddhism, which was the Kamakura period, which like a 12th century Japan. And he actually officially got married and have a family and practice the Dharma. So the central part of the Buddhism in Japan is not much of the precepts, but rather how you practice the Dharma. So the central is always go to Dharma. and then so that even like a Pure Land tradition that I'm in, so all the eating, food, or even like what do you call it, the three essentials, like food and clothing and then shelters. Those are important as because that help the Dharma. So if you get married and you don't practice anymore, don't get married. And then, but if you're worried about the sex and all those things, and then so you can't really concentrate on the practice. Then what do you call it, get married and then practice the Dharma. And so simply, so what you focus is one of the main part of the things, especially the Pure Land Buddhism. The Honen is explained that way. Everything you do should be doing towards the Dharma. So everyday things, what you do, become everything is the Dharma practice. So whether whatever the stage. So that was the kind of main understanding. So the precepts. Yeah, this is one of the strange part of the history too. In Japan also, I mean, people try to bring the precepts to Japan, but for some reason it was not really. I mean, there are some precepts there, but then some of the precepts are already Dharma age and age, so feel like precepts itself is not as valid as we can maintain. And so the thing that happen is also even just wearing the robe itself is value during the Dharma age, because there's still teachings there. So I think one of the important part of the monks to do is to carry the teaching, whether you can do the practice and then whether attain the enlightenment or not. But still, that it's this age of the end of Dharma, the keeping the teaching, is itself is a very important aspect of the Buddhist, the priests or nuns should do. So that was a totally kind of a different understanding from that sense. Oh, by the way, I don't know how long I supposed to give talks, so I wasn't. I tried to just put a little point. Okay.
You're relatively limited on time, so it's great for you to set out to explain to us the difference. And I'm absolutely fascinated by what I understand is that there seems to have been some point in Japanese history where there was actually a relatively clear distinction made between Vinaya and Dharma, and there was a greater emphasis placed on, look, Dharma, correct me if I'm wrong, Dharma must be preserved and Dharma is the real priority, whereas things related to the Vinaya do not seem to have stuck as as tightly to the Japanese tradition.
Although it's respected, though. It's
respected, absolutely. But see, Dharma ending age is common to my own tradition, the Chinese tradition, and so is Pure Land, right? So the Chinese tradition and shares the Pure Land tradition with the Japanese tradition. But as you know, the Chinese tradition also has the Lu Zhong, which is Ritsu. In Japan, I think they call it Ritsu, the school of Ritsu, which is precepts. But I don't think. But apparently, it has not had the same emphasis or priority historically as more Dharma. I think that's very fascinating, and I think we have 3 wonderful guests who are from the Vajrayana tradition. So I would be very interested to hear, the perspective on this idea. But is it fair to say that the Dharma has taken some kind of precedence over Vinaya, and therefore celibacy has not been so central to your tradition?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I think that way. Yeah, so I agree basically. And then but I forgot, I got married. I'm married too. So in case if you wanted to know whether I'm married or not.
Okay. Declaration of interest. Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think we'll come back to the tradition, the Japanese tradition, shortly. But I would like to perhaps invite maybe Tenzin Dasel to maybe give your perspective on the Vajrayana, and we'll go around to Micheal and Tenzin Peljor. We'll do that.
Thank you. And thank you, brother, for sharing that background on the Japanese tradition and also your own journey and transparency. I mean, it's all towards attaining, the deepest enlightenment, the deepest liberation. So to share from Vajrayana is also still sharing under the Mahayana umbrella that all of us, all the speakers here are under. What I would share more is one thing that I'll pick up on, and what was mentioned was in Japan that the laity became to practice the Dharma in their daily way of living as a kind of a way to live the Dharma. But actually, that's not very different from precepts. So there are precepts that we take also in Vajrayana Buddhism. I started 22 years ago as a layperson when I met my teacher, and was a layperson up until only 7 years ago. So I have a very different experience on walking the Dharma as that, as a graduate student doing, studies on Mahayana, as well as different interfaith studies, part of comparative religion. And what I can say from my own life experience is when we have different commitments in life, there are different goals. And so there are goals within a family tradition that are able to be met, that take time, that take a lot of energy, a lot of resources. And then there are goals in the sacred spiritual tradition that also take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources. And my own understanding from my own experience now, not so much, I don't want to speak for all of Vajrayana, is that what I loved about the Vajrayana tradition, coming more connected with Tibetan Buddhist culture, was this invitation to be able to live the Dharma very clearly by taking either the lay woman's vows and deciding which of those 5 precepts I could actually hold very genuinely, to then eventually seeing the purpose of holding those vows well, to then being led eventually to the choice to want to take monastic vows, which are higher ordination vows, although still as a novice, because the nuns in the Vajrayana tradition don't hold as many full vows as a fully ordained monk. That tradition didn't make it up to Tibet from India. But my understanding of any kind of vows that we take, whether we take vows of a marriage ceremony, we take vows of a layperson to follow certain commitments of practicing virtue, we take vows as an ordained member of a sangha, whether it's Buddhist in whichever branch, or Christian, or whichever traditions, Jainism, many traditions still have an ordained sangha that is a monastic, is that the meaning of the vow is personal. And so to understand in my own journey is just the vow is to really be of greatest benefit without imputing separation, without delineating into a duality of separateness. And so that's a oneness that becomes the main focus of sharing the Dharma, is a oneness of the commitment under the vows to create only virtue through the body, speech, and mind, to be selflessly in the Bodhisattva vow, having given away my body, life, and resources freely to all beings, not really to making that individuation to my family, my partner, one particular person to share this body with, but to share it equally around with every creature, to hold them away from being harmed, which means always keeping my gaze inward to my own body, speech, and mind, and to be of most benefit to as many beings through the Dharma activities, mostly through speech, wherever that might manifest as a possibility, to be available to that. Many people, I'm sure, can do that very easily within a relationship. I wasn't able to find that way as a layperson to where my Dharma path was unfolding. But I think the reason the life story of the Buddha, when I really thought deeply upon it, really moved me, was that he really was being pushed in many directions by the society and the world. His father wanted to become the king. He was a prince. He did get married. He eventually left the wife and child for those 6 years to practice austere asceticism. And then once he attained, went back to the family, and the family joined him in the Sangha as monastics. So that storyline, to my mind, was very compelling for the reasons in the spiritual life for leaving the householder's life. And my own life has shown me, I really pray from my heart, please may I always be born not in the householder's life, because it's very easy to be of much more benefit to be moving around without having a farm, which I had in Maine before, without having a relationship, without having familial commitments to people or to animals. I mean, many, many commitments we can have. So I see in my own practice of Vajrayana that there was freedom as a layperson to take many initiations, to do a lot of study, to practice and hold the vows of a laywoman, to then come up to take Rabjang, the novice ordination for a year, to see, hey, will this really work at the age of 49 to hold these like novice vows? If it feels like it's something that will hold, I'll go more slowly into the next Get Soul vows. So taking the time to let the path unfold for its own reasons demonstrated to my mind and my journey the great opportunity of holding and living within the vows on each step of the way. That's an inward decision. I mean, that really affects others, but we have to be very clear, I think, inwardly, what is the purpose when we give a vow? A vow is a spoken commitment that comes from the heart mind. So within the tradition, there are very clear reasons for this, to make these kinds of commitments and vows that require very serious personal consideration. Because especially with Dharma, it's different. We make a vow to a marriage, to one individual, and then maybe to a family that we might create, to our community and society around us. But when we make a vow as a monastic, we're making it to the entire Sangha that's ever been, all the way back to the Buddha. Maybe even prior to the Buddha, there were other Buddhas and Sanghas. But anyway, let's just say for 2,600 years, and that there is still a Sangha in existence is amazing. It's reported to be one of the oldest, longest human communities that has still been in existence consistently. So that's a very serious responsibility. And what does that entail? That entails not only holding the vows well, but also benefiting from them. So living into them as well as we can with humility. We have our practices of knowing when we are not on our spot on game perfect, body, speech, and mind. Then we have, practices every month that we do of sojung to cleanse ourselves, to come back again and again to the vows. That's the main guide on the path now, the vows within the Dharma. So it's not very easy all the time, but being a monastic gives us the time and the freedom, the bandwidth, if you will, within our own practice to observe the body, speech, and mind, to see how our Dharma is able to unfold and how we are able to continue to grow in the vows towards the goal.
Thank you, Venerable. That's very meaningful to contextualize the celibate choice as part of a set of vows and commitments aimed towards attaining existential liberation, Buddhahood, enlightenment. And I would like to pick up on something that you said. To hope to be born repeatedly as a monastic. I think that's an extremely powerful kind of commitment, and it's something that you made out of a free and informed choice, right? And I think part of I don't know, but I think people don't appreciate how serious this commitment is, because it's not just it's a New Year's resolution, or it's like, I'm going to cut fat, lose weight, that kind of thing. It's nothing like that. I would like to quickly move to Tenzin Peljor. How do you understand this notion of commitment to celibacy? What has been your experience with it? And then I'll quickly move on to Michael.
I mean, it's not. What's the commitment to celibacy? I mean, it's part of the vows. It's more like a commitment to be a monk or a nun, or to live as a monastic, which basically means as a person who is not a householder, a homeless. And so actually going to leave the home and to live as a homeless was the opportunity to let go all of the burden and the bindings to a worldly life and to find a space to turn your mind inwardly and to work on your mind. It relaxes in a very vast way, binding commitments to the world, family, and so on, to find the inner space, to work on yourself, and to use the Dharma to purify mind and to to grow your qualities and so on, and finally to reach at one point your spiritual aims. One time of the Bodhis, or maybe you're just sufficient for you to have a higher rebirth, whatever. So basically, for me, it's more like finding a suitable lifestyle which supports your spiritual path. And this suitable lifestyle includes celibacy. And it's the first vow of a fully ordained monk not to have sexual intercourse. So it's a very basic thing. And so behind it is basically, if you look from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition with the 3 sets of vows, the monastic vows, the Mahayana vows, and the Vajrayana vows, you could say monastic vows basically serve as a means to let go your attachment, to get rid of attachment. So you try to get rid of all of the attachments, and so basically, because it's one of the mind poisons. Then there comes in a second layer, the Mahayana vows basically means to let go of your aversion, to have affection and love to every human being, to include every being in your love, to have a close relationship so that they feel safe in your presence, and then you can help them out. So, and then you could say, even maybe it's a little bit my interpretation, the Vajrayana vows is to let go of the ignorance. I mean, of course, you do this all also in the other set of vows, but they have a main focus. So basically, the focus on the monastic vows is to let go of the attachment, and that's why there are so many rules and so many regulations about bodily and verbal behavior. And then the sex has a biological component, which because there are some factors which come together, and then there is also attachment component, and so you want to get rid of the attachment component. So, and this is the key thing in the monastic lifestyle, to get rid of your attachment. So that's why you work on the most hardest attachment you can have, the attachment to sexual pleasure. So luckily, I have experienced this before I became a monk, which is not true for all the monks, because they got monks when they were 7, 8 years old or 13 years old, whatever. So basically, it's just part of a set of vows which a certain aim, and I think most important is that you understand yourself why you took on or why you don't take on these set of vows and what it means for you and why it is beneficial or why it is hard to maintain. And if you have clarity and you see those vows as a support, then you can work with them. And as Venerable Tenzin Dasel said, then you have also the confession ritual where you make the faults. Of course, there are some faults you can confess, but you're gone. You have to leave the monastic community. But this is very helpful. And there is also a weakness because in certain Vinaya traditions, the confession ritual is very, boiled down to, and certain things which are very useful to confess the direct misdeeds you did are not yet done. And therefore, and then the rituals to purify these misdeeds are also not done. So that's why it becomes more weak, or you get less support to maintain all the vows. So you have an opportunity to use the vows for your growth. The best is you know what you are doing, why you are doing it, and then it gets the support for your spiritual path to let go on your attachment, not only to let go, to work on your attachment, because it's very difficult to let go. So this is basically what I think I have to share. Our last point, difficulty in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is these 3 sets of vows are sometimes in conflicting situation. So you should not steal, kill, and so on. And then Bodhisattva secondary vow said, but you should do this if it is for the benefit of others. So it gets all very tricky. And there is a lot of discussion about if they are in harmony or in conflicting positions. Difficult thing. And then you have the individual procedures, sometimes just more the monastic way, sometimes more the Mahayana, and sometimes more the Vajrayana way. So there are, it's a great variety in all of this, dealing with this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tenzin. I think I think that's absolutely critical. And I'd like to pick up on something for discussion later, maybe, about the cultural practice of sending monastics, not monastics, young people to monasteries, and for them to, live the monastic life so early. Now, I myself have a Theravada teacher as well, so no shade thrown in any direction, but just saying what happens to those boys, and what are the effects of a choice, life-changing choice that is not, as far as I understand, not totally freely made at the individual level, given the emphases that we've been discussing tonight. Michael, you have a very important and sobering story that I think that should draw everyone's attention, and everyone needs to reflect carefully on. Could you discuss with us a little bit about your experience with the vows within the institution that you were once part of, and what you concluded from your experience?
Right. So I'm going to pre-apologize for my, cultural background. This Australian ruffian kind of tendencies, but part of my, approach towards the Dharma was gradually, like, I knew early on when I was with these folk Wan Shan, just happened to be in the neighborhood where I lived, and I was going there and learning like a Dharma, Pure Land Dharma, along with, Mahayana stories about Asanga, and then they later they gave me a refuge ceremony, and they also emphasized, why didn't you take the 5 precepts, but I wasn't really prepared, so luckily I didn't do that. Then over time I started to, I didn't want to take vows I couldn't keep, I wanted to really be prepared, so I prepared myself by giving up things like intoxicants, and I found the whole work towards giving that away and being ready very positive in my life. So eventually, reading stories about Buddha, I was inspired to become a monk. And at the time, I didn't have, I ran into Rigpa and very good educated instructors that they had. It's a very wide variety, depends on who is your introducing you to the Dharma, and how you can't say it's very individual to who you interacted with. But I ended up offering, they actually were looking for people to get ordained, so I offered myself. And because I was very effective worker, like with skills, then that they could like see their way to paying for me to come and live in France. So then after about another year, that I went to Tibet, to Nepal, but got ordained by Trulshik Rinpoche, who I have still no reason to doubt whatsoever as anything but a very accomplished and wise. So he gave me what I believe is a very pure ceremony. He made sure everything was right, and so that's something I was thinking about when Reverend TK was talking about Japan. It's not easy to maintain a lineage of vows, right? You require quite a number of monks, especially if you want to do a fully ordained, set of vows. So I can imagine that it became onerous especially if you're practicing a different style with different Buddhas. So let's be honest. For me, the most important thing about the vows is becoming very honest with yourself, and you can't even hold them if you're not honest with yourself. And I don't find many people to be like that, other than perhaps serious monastics. It's very hard. So I think it makes sense. It makes sense what happened in Japan and other places, that they adapted according to what people wanted and what they were practicing. And so then, yes, I lived in France, and I practiced and was introduced more into Mahayana and other vows, and then Vajrayana, and not too rapidly, in a gradual kind of way. But my experience, what could be useful for me is talking a little bit about what is it like to finish up with the vows, to stop, and should you and can you and how, So I would say today that I'm not so much of a Mahayana or Vajrayana. Like I have various people like Patrul Rinpoche and his writings that I take as my teachings, but I'm more of a like a Theravada system, because I had to, but I'll tell you why. First, I couldn't pursue. I couldn't stay in Rigpa after some time. Various things kept happening that were telling me that I had to go, like harmful things to people, violence, and obviously people not keeping their vows. So all these talk of samaya and vows became very how do you say it's conjecture as opposed to reality. I think it was very good. I heard that Tenzin Dasel mentioned we shouldn't talk about what we haven't directly seen and heard and understood and perhaps experienced as well. So I'm trying to be like that. So I did see the things that were wrong, and many people thought it was wrong. At the time, it was whole rooms full of people. So in the end, it was very hard for me to leave for many reasons, and I often write about that. But I ended up coming to Germany and then Thailand, and then I went to Australia for a while, and I was still a monk. But then when I came back to Thailand, I've been reading about how is it that you can end your vows, and I had two sources. This one source is a very high, like recognized as a bit of a translator expert, Zenkar Rinpoche from China, and he's also a Tibetan, and he used to come to Rigpa, and one time a monk wanted to stop being a monk, so wanted to give up his vows, and he explained it's no big deal. You can do it in this. If you don't want to, then you can just stop. And then I also read that in the kind of the Pali-based versions of translations of the Vinaya, that if one grows weary of the training in the vows, you can simply decide to stop, which is in opposition with the way many people taught it to me. That when I first took my vows, they were given in a way which was kind of unique to their tradition. Like, these are lifelong vows. If you want to get out of them, don't come to me. I'm not letting you out, which is an implication that you need to come to them to be let out of the vows, which you do not. So it was almost dishonest to say that, frankly. But, well, maybe it's just the way I remember it. But it was a revelation for me. So I didn't want to stop, but I tried. I went to a couple of different temples in Thailand, and I just came to this point where I kept seeing the similar kinds of corruption, signs of it. And then I just heard something from Sogyo Rinpoche, or I don't call him a Rinpoche anymore, Sogyo Laka, that he said, oh, my name at that time was Nawang Sangye, right? He said, oh, Sangye, the so-called monk. So if there's even a question about whether you're a vow holder and of good reputation, I think maybe you should potentially disrobe, because especially if it's coming from where you were living before, because that would be harmful to the reputation of the Dharma. And so I felt like I was just like, well, if they think that, and my own feelings together, I think I'll just stop. And then after a time, I had a lot of other experience. I had to basically learn how to live out on my own. And it wasn't long before I you know, just all the worldly things that you are protected from by the vows started to unfold, you know, my naivety and so on. But eventually I did find myself to a very, you know, good, loving relationship, and then have a lot of time to sit down and decide for myself what I wanted to continue with as my Dharma practice. Like, my house is still, it's full of shrines, and we live a very, as much, at least as much respectful of the Buddha type of life. Just in this street, there's shrines everywhere in Thailand. I mean, and these people are very pure and unassuming practitioners of the Dharma, making offerings all the time, but with good motivation. I often ask them, like, why are you doing that? What's your... The other thing, just because it came up when others were talking, like, there was this talk about Buddha at one point emaciated, you know, taking austerity perhaps too far, versus later, or not taking it seriously, or the middle way where he came, and which, you know, balancing things. The way I see people in the modern world understanding austerity and the vows is that my hands are disappearing into the background, but austerity, if it's off to one side here, and, you know, indulgence on the other side, I think people, even when they're living in the modern world, austerity, we don't even get close to it. All right, maybe some people living in some monasteries do, but so I only can talk from my experience in Rigpa, but there wasn't a huge focus on austerity, and then it got kind of bypassed with, you know, but we have to be with everything, and we can purify it into, you know, like nectar by various practices and things like that. So these kind of things confused me a lot, and then that, in the end, that's why I spent time researching, where does it even come from? Like, why would I believe that, and what's the source, and is that really even a sutra, you know? So I'm just saying that so that you know who I am. So I'm not tacitly, like, under the moniker of Vajrayana or Mahana. I'm just a guy that accepts what makes sense, and that's an ongoing process. But what Patrul Rinpoche did was, he, as far as I understood, he'd never had full vows. He was a Getsul himself, but he was very educated and realized, and so he often traveled, and that was probably his respect for the vows that made him not take the full vows, because it's not that you need a certain situation to protect you, so you need to live a certain way. Otherwise the vows are just constantly breaking, and you're constantly, like, confessing, and maybe that's normal to a lot of Tibetans, but for me, that never really. It's like, if you're constantly breaking vows, then maybe you should reconsider where you live. So that's what monasteries are for. Okay, so so now I'm married too, and happily, you know. And I think for people who are survivors of spiritual abuse, it's often very hard to stay out of that part where you came from without forming connections and a community and support. It's not so easy, you know. So for me, it was more like a matter of just, like, mental health. Okay, so I pass back to Raymond. Thank you for letting me contribute. But if we talk about ethics, I'm very interested in ethics now.
Yes. I really thank you for sharing very important story and your experience, because it's important to hear from people who have gone through and encountered these you know, quite shocking and unethical situations. And I'm well mindful of time. We're 50 minutes in, and Reverend, I think, will need to leave soon. So I would just like to pass on to him for a final perspective sharing, if you don't mind, Reverend TK. I'm just interested. Is there a general principles or practices in which
プリンス
おはようございます。
ちょっと待ってくださいね。
様の絵が今ちらっと見えたみたい。
すみません。ちょっと待ってください。Just one second. Just one second.
It looks like we've got a different call.
静かにしておいてもらっていいですか？あと5分だけ静かにしておいてもらっていい？ちょっと今ね、あと5分だけちょっと5 minutes だけお願いします。はい、すみません。Thank you. No, that's other stuff's already. Can you hear me? Other stuff's
Reverend, do you need to go? I don't. It's all good.
Yeah. Share whatever you are asking. This is the last thing that I can say. So
okay, sure, no problem. All right, we've got 10 minutes, so it'll be quick. Just wondering. You say that Japanese Buddhist leaders and priests, they get married, right? Everyone gets married. Actually, is there a sort of set sort of method or principles in which a partner is chosen? Because I think we're all interested to know, like, how do you choose your partners?
Yeah, basically it should be so by getting married, that should encourage us to practice the Dharma. So that's more like
interesting.
So if you get married and then you stop, have a family life, then that's opposite of what you're supposed to be doing. But of course, you never know what happens after you get married. So some people got, but the idea itself is that anything like a family hold, meaning they're the one who's supporting the Dharma also. So it's like, you do yourself everything before possibly, but yet you have a partner to, people coming together, supporting you for the Dharma practice. That should be the ideal. But then, of course, so that's one of the fundamental part of it. And then at the same time, the Japanese part of the, when you talk about vow, the being a monk itself is more like, a monk, or actually, even though it's not really monk, but the people, well, sort of like a monk, I mean, resembling monk. But then the dedication itself is actually on this lifetime. Yeah, in this lifetime, I will spend my life to center in the Dharma. I mean, that's the more like a decision that we'll make. So that you just wear the robe, but then the robe itself is a kind of reminder that I have to practice the Dharma of this lifetime. So it's in a way it's regular clothes, wearing the regular clothes is something different, but just having the robe itself is really very important commitment that I should be I should have. So with that, we just do practice continuously, and maybe until I die, in my case, or maybe forever, continue for the next life too, possibly. But so whatever we do, just for the focus itself, as I say, in our tradition, Pure Land tradition, which is Amitabha. So the practice of Amitabha is the one that we dedicate ourselves. So myself too. So, but anyway, well, thank you very much for the.
Thank you so much, Reverend.
Very nice meeting you.
Thank you so much for your time. We'll have to let you go at this point. We'll have to let you go. No worries. And so it's very interesting how he mentioned that the spouse, family life is supposed to enhance the Dharma, and so in that sense, it almost sounds quite almost exactly like what I suppose a pious layperson would say in another tradition. It's interesting how the archetype of the sexually active and kind of pervy monk is quite common in Chinese literature, right? As a bad guy, they're often cast as villains, right? Whereas I remember many years ago when I was a child, there was a very popular Japanese cartoon, these days they call them anime, right? Where there was a main character, one of the main characters is part of a hero group, and it was a monk who was constantly chasing after women. He was a good guy, but he was always constantly chasing after the hero, one of the heroines. And so I was thinking, what a contrast between the Chinese and Japanese traditions, right? Especially in literature, whether it's modern or contemporary. So I think currently we have all sorts of diverse understandings of the vows, and the vows seem to be, in one way or another, at the core of our understanding of the place of celibacy in the Buddhist traditions. Venerable Tenzin, I would like to pose the question as we springboard from what Michael had been discussing. What kind of advice, a counsel, would you give to the people who they might not have experienced directly, but just have this question intellectually, like what happens when you find yourself in that position of struggling with attachment, or feeling like worrying over the possibility of having to repeatedly confess and cleanse yourself and all that. Those worries spring up, even if they don't happen. What counsel and advice would you offer? And perhaps you've already given it at certain points.
Oh, okay. Thank you, brother, for that question. Firstly, I would say the advice is something Michael mentioned, is to examine your teachers very well. So when I was about 35 or so, I met my Lama, who still is my root Lama, His Eminence Kensor Rinpoche, Lupsang Setana, a very humble monk at that time, just called Genna. Although he was a geshe, a kind of highly educated PhD in Buddhist philosophy, he was just someone I met in Maine. Went to hear a talk he gave at Maine College of Art, and thought it would be on Dharma. I had only briefly met the Dharma at the Big Island in Hawaii, at a little temple there back in the year 2000. And wasn't really interested actually in organized religion at all. I wasn't knowing that I was seeking a teacher, although I somehow knew there was more wisdom to learn. And so one of the first questions I asked him when we were in a long car ride going up to one of my graduate classes from Portland to Bangor, Maine, sitting in the back seat, it just spontaneously came to my mind was, how do you know if you've met an enlightened master? And he giggled and he said, oh, that's a really good question. And I'm thinking, what are you asking? Where's this coming from? And he said, actually, that is a good question. He said, I can't speak for all traditions. All traditions have different criteria, but in our tradition, within our sacred texts, in the Pecha, in the Dharma, it's very clearly stated that the student should examine the teacher. The student should find the teacher and examine him or her for up to 12 years. And during that time, the teacher is going to be guiding and examining the disciple or the student as well. But it should be a very careful and slow progression entering into this kind of sacred, community or beginning of community, because your teacher is going to be the first person that's going to help you learn the Dharma and is therefore representing the Sangha. So I remember looking out the car window thinking, wow, okay, 12 years, 47, 48, that's pretty old, as you think in your mid-30s. But before I could say anything, I looked back at him and he said, well, in your case, at least for 7 or 8 years, So I thought, well, I don't know where this is going, but I really trust this being. I really feel that there's wisdom here in the Dharma. I had not had a lot of exposure to it, although I had a friend in college who was a monk from Sri Lanka, and we had a nice friendship. And so slowly over the years, he said, look, so back to my monk friend back in 2002, he said, I come to Maine a few times a year. If you like the teachings, just keep asking questions, study, decide for yourself if this is a path that you're more interested in, and you can come to the teachings. And so on the way back from him giving a nice talk to this world religions course, I was in the car again and I thought to him and I said, oh, I've always wanted to go to India, but I've never had the chance. And I would like to come and volunteer at the school that you started. And he kind of looked and said, oh, yes, you will. And I thought, how that will happen, I don't know. I'm a broke graduate student. And sure enough, within 2 years, I was volunteering at the school. And so it was very slow, though. It was a very genuinely authentic path that didn't coerce me. No one pressured any vows at any time. I quickly had karmic kind of connections with the Holiness, the Dalai Lama. I wasn't really going to India even when I was going for a study to try to meet with His Holiness, but our paths would cross sometimes through teachings he was giving very quickly. And so I just paid attention to some of these things. But more importantly, I thought, well, if this is an authentic practice, then you just bring yourself to authentically take it on within the framework of the life you're living now. You don't need to change and become somebody else. But of course, life is constantly about impermanence and changing, and the dynamics are moving. And slowly over time, yes, over the 7 or 8 years, I did take like general refuge, and then officially asked my teacher upon 8 years in 2010, oh, can I take a formal refuge with you now? And the Bodhisattva vows, although I had said them many times at teachings, I felt like a deepening in the heart had manifested, had germinated. And then again, slowly towards the monastic vows. So I think it's really important to go slowly to study. I was doing not just as a graduate student in theology, but I was already really interested actually in spiritual evolution, as well as being a farmer and doing things in the biological world, the material world. Integration's important, and all these things take time. Wisdom takes time. So I would suggest to people, ask questions and examine the teacher that you feel called to. There's nothing that the teacher will ever hold back. The Buddha himself said, I've taught with an open hand. Of course, he taught with 84,000 different ways, so it's going to address different mind streams, or I would say learning styles. But it really is on us as a seeker, as a student, when we're meeting the Dharma or meeting a teacher of any tradition, to really be careful and not jump too quickly and think, oh, this will solve all my problems. Oh, I mean, we come to the Dharma largely because we have questions. We have had experienced suffering. We have an impulse to want to continue, as Venerable Tenzin Peljor said, to continue our own inward evolution of our own growth, our own self evolution of this lifetime, to bring out the qualities that we're able to. And this has to be something we know about deeply ourselves, and then bring our questions, to the teacher, who should really hold those with deep respect, and hold those with, sometimes there will be also not the deep respect we expect as an educated Westerner, but sometimes being ignored, not hearing your name being said anymore. You have to move through different stages of commitment and discipleship to try to understand more deeply what's going on. And if we take things sometimes too personally, that might be wounding our path and our practice. Our ego feels really hurt, so we leave. But then, as Micheal said, sometimes if we see things that are really not ethically sound, we need to stand from a healthy perspective, a healthy sense, because who is actually walking the path? We need a healthy sense of ego until we're ready to drop it. As one of my teachers, Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo, says, at the beginning, we really need that sense of being able to judge for ourselves. The Buddha himself said that, and it's right behind His Holiness the Dalai Lama's throne in the monastery up in MacLeod. There are 2 plaques, and one says, "Believe nothing, no matter who has said it, even if I myself have said it. Test the teachings the way a goldsmith tests gold. Rub it, stretch it, make sure it's pure." And then the other plaque just says, "Do not commit anything non-virtuous. Subdue your own mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha." So this always brings it back to the individual practitioner to take deep responsibility for one's own practice. But of course, we don't want to be misled. So we need to be able to ask hard questions of our own experience, and then bring them to teachers and expect that they will give us genuine guidance, genuine insight in just the way that we need it. And then if we have deeper concerns about an issue, to still have the courage to address those, even if they're not very comfortable. As Venerable Tenzin Peljor said, like, there's stuff going on in Vajrayana that needs to be exposed, that needs to be spoken about. His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, if you have questions, if you're a firsthand witness, expose it, talk generally directly to the person involved, and then expose this as a situation where you're not going to be participating in it because you yourself find that there are things ethically completely wrong. And the Vinaya, the ethics for all of us, not just for monastics, but the ethics of our body, speech, and mind, the 10 virtues, those have to be held by all practitioners, lay and monastic. So I think you have to understand what are those 10 virtues to cultivate, what are the 10 non-virtues to avoid. The Sojong isn't about being a guilt-ridden experience. It's actually quite a beautiful way of seeing that you're able continually to keep your purification of your vows. So I also lived in a nunnery for 4 years. I lived in three different nunneries really in India, but especially during COVID for 2 solid years with Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo and all of her nuns, over 100 nuns, some who are in lifelong retreat, over 100 who are in practicing daily practice every day, 24/7, 365, going into 2 months of silence and retreat every summer. Some are in the Shedra in the monastic college. There are monks who come from the nearby monastery. It's a very healthy relationship, like a brother-sister connection, where monks come and participate in debates with the nuns, participate in watching the Dakini dances that the nuns are now doing. Nuns go to the monastery to receive teachings. So I think the transparency is really important. So at every level, if there is something happening from the highest to the lowest, there needs to be transparency. Why is someone getting married? Why is someone having a baby? Why is someone still then in a high throne Lama robe if there's in fact something else going on? Like if it's going on, just be open about it, because everyone will benefit from understanding that. When we have secrecy, or when we're told not to ask the questions, I think that's when we need to really come back and ask more clarification questions. So, you should be able to value your own integrity, but knowing that you're holding the vows as well as you can. And you should definitely be able to ask those around you from the monastic community and the lay community to hold that integrity as well.
Yes. Well, thank you, Venerable. And the teacher-student relationship you describe in its ideal form sounds absolutely profound and also
it's
almost
vital.
sweet.
It is. It's vital.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Yeah,
really blessed in that way, because I have very valid teachers that I've been with for some, with Jetsuma for some lesser years, but with my root Lama and with His Holiness the Dalai Lama for a long time. So, and many others that have come through the Sangha, Venerable Rabina, many venerable monks, Venerable Geshe Namdak, who's a Geshe, the first Western Geshe, who's really valid, committed teachers. And from my own side, from the Sangha as well, from the Vajrayana Sangha that I've been around, especially in India and in Dharamsala, in McLeod-Ganj, in the Himachal Pradesh region, very genuine, committed international Sangha, very devoted to maintaining the Dharma very purely. So that's a point of rejoicing for this monthly practice. It's not like in Christian traditions like mea culpa, mea culpa. There's no me to really get upset about. It's just cultivating even more appreciation for wanting to uphold those vows very, very genuinely. It's bringing more awareness and more compassion.
Absolutely. So the transparency, the teacher, the mutual respect between the teacher and the student, and the kind of the roles that they play, the almost the interplay of their roles, which leads to ethical and fulfilling practice. And this, what I picked up with you on your talk about, on your mention of monks and nuns also coming together in a platonic kind of dialogue and shared activity.
Oh, it's so joyful. I mean, it's so wonderful. I can't imagine the Sangha without that. That's why that's why I can say I pray always to be, born as a Sangha, because it's like having this huge family of brothers and sisters that genuinely have concern for each other and give mutual support and can understand the challenges in a way that others really can't. It's really quite beautiful and profound that way. I have so much gratitude, so much respect. And this also comes back to taking the responsibility, that one has to understand that one isn't just responsible. As I said, yes, for ourselves, our teachers are responsible, but as an ordained Sangha, you're taking a responsibility in a way to present that genuinely on behalf of all the monastic Sangha.
Yeah.
You want to put the best foot, the best open heart, the best open mind, the most beautiful speech, the most genuine ethics forward, because that is the beauty of how the Dharma stays in the world. With or without you. I mean, I'm just one, I'm just one, but the ordained Sangha is tens of thousands. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the experiences are quite diverse. And so we have transparency, we have the master teacher disciple, we have the teacher student relationship, and we have the encounters between monastic men and women. Venerable Tenzin Peljor, I'd like to inquire about your experience regarding these issues. How has your experience been around these critical aspects of an ethical and properly functioning Sangha, monastic Sangha?
Raymond, I'm not so clear about your specific question. Is your question about celibacy, about the teacher-student relationship, about this all? I'm a little bit confused. Maybe you can.
No, just a general question about the general package that of celibacy and what Tenzin has been discussing. How the relationship between teacher and student can affect the quality of the experience of the discipleship of the path. Transparency, talking openly should you encounter problems, which is what we are actually starting to approach, and this is going to be a topic that we have moving forward. I was just hoping to get your perspective and, if necessary, your experience about these big questions around what have you encountered, and what have your thoughts been around these these trends and experiences.
I could add one little thing, like if you don't have a stable community that you've joined with to support you as a monk, like does that make it more difficult to maintain celibacy for you? Do you find more things happen that challenge that kind of lifestyle? I mean, I guess given that how long you've been a monk for, you've probably got it all under control. But if one was traveling as a Sangha almost of one, having to find their own home, things like that happen to you, as I know your story.
Okay. I try to make it brief. So basically, I wanted to become a monk based on when I read the vows, considering what the vows include, and I had a clear decision why I want to become a monk. So I started all with the wish to become a monk after I read the Four Noble Truths and the 227 vows in the Theravada tradition. So then, looking for Buddhism, I stumbled into the New Kadamba tradition, who forced me on a teacher and asked me to see him as a Buddha, and every fault I see in the teacher is my own projection and my fault. So basically, my whole monastic life was a bit messed up by imposing teachers on me who claim unquestioned authority. And at the same time, I didn't have a proper training as a monk. So it all started with big complications, which are very much part of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And you won't find these complications in the Theravada tradition. So maybe I should add, I lived in a Theravada monastery, at least for a month, in a Chittas monastery, educational monastery of the Ajahn Chah forest tradition. And I'm befriended, of course, also with Theravada monks. And I have a Theravada teacher, Bhante Sujiva. And I appreciate very much the monastic lifestyle and, and the simplicity of it. But then with all these teachers, seeing as a Buddha, the Turgus, the Rinpoches, it gets all far more complicated. So, and actually a little bit twisted up everything. So basically, this is what I have to say. Then, but as a monk, monastic community is of utter importance. And because of the Sojong, you cannot do Sojong on your own. You need a monastic support community. You need the elders, which hopefully serve as a good example for you. And a good example serves already by just being. Because the qualities of the person has good, the person who is a carrier of good qualities, is he is a mirror for you to see your own weaknesses and then to inspire you to work on it. Or he's a mirror of the qualities you don't have but could have if you work on it. So that's why a monastic community is very helpful, extremely inspiring, and much, needed for a monk or nun. But unluckily, I had to leave different Buddhist communities because they didn't like my engagement about sexual abuse in Buddhist communities. So I was kicked out of the monastery. I was kicked out of the Dalai Lama birthday celebration. I was kicked out of a Buddhist center. So I lost everything. So now, now someone bought me a flat. So I live in a flat alone as a monk, and I feel not well with this. People asked me to run a community. I said, slowly, so let's see. But then a nun who was a former medical doctor and lived in a monastery in Taiwan for 14 years. She left the monastery because she said, I cannot serve sentient beings by living in a monastery. I have the bodhisattva vows. She left the monastery and they said to her, if you leave the monastery, you never ever can come back. And she decides it's more important to serve sentient beings than to have the security to go back to the monastery. I have much appreciation for her determination. She visited me and she said, okay, now you have a monk's vihara and you live on your own, but this gives you the freedom to serve sentient beings. So I tried to find my middle way. I miss the community. I want to be part of a community. I'm far more growing, or germinate in a community. But it's more harder now. But what to do? You are a pioneer as a monastic in the West. Nobody has gone this way. So you have to go and you don't give up. And I'm still a happy monk, and I think this still drives me. And it's part of the monastic life to have hardships. And the hardships help you to work on your mind. Basically, I like the hardships because then you have always the question, why I'm still a monk? And then you have far more determination to continue to be a monk. Or you give it up because it's too hard. But this has never been a question for me. So this is a little bit my situation, what I have to tell. And I would, of course, wish more support from a community and so on, but it's a totally different matter. I don't want to bring my topics here into discussion. I love to be a monk. I think monastic community is very important, but the lay community is also very important. And basically, we are all following Buddha's path. We are one Sangha following the Buddha, and we should do as good as possible to support each other. I think this is the key point. Thank you. So I think I have nothing else to say.
Well, I really really appreciate the layers of diversity and your candidness and forthrightness in sharing the shades of gray, and that can be overlaid on a monk's life. You are able to perceive and identify the problems within the institution, while at the same time you yourself, as you said, you're still a monk and you're a happy monk, and that carries you forward. And it's not about necessarily being in or out. That itself is also a choice, but also to experience, the issues and even the crises within the whatever institution you have experienced. But carrying forward and finding a different way. And there's the added complexity that, in the West, many of you are pioneers. Many of you are doing this for the first time, only first or second generation monastics. So it's not uncommon to not have precedent. It's the first time. So this is also something that you're feeling out and exploring. I was wondering, Michael, what do you have to make of all this as a disrobed monk? I think when monastics face the question of celibacy, they struggle with it, or they witness or see difficulties or unethical practices associated with it within a certain institution. They face many difficult choices. I don't have a particular angle with this question, but I just would like to pick your brains about how you think of these very difficult choices that they make, and is there also a real difficulty involved with disrobing? As Tenzin Peljor said, monastic community is absolutely critical. Do you lose a critical component of it when you disrobe? Or do, as he related with his friend, like, are there aspects or other vows that you can rely on to realize the Dharma without monasticism?
So many things I could say that would just explode out into a world of weird experiences that I had, but like something I've been thinking, because I heard Tenzin Dasel say something. Sexuality is connected with identity, like, and this idea of sexual preference. So some things that happened to me before I left Rigpa was that sometimes people would ask me, "Are you gay?" And or even the Sogyo Laka said it in public on the mic while I'm sitting on stage in robes, trying to focus on what seemed like an important teaching. He asked me, and I didn't answer him. But other people, I answered like, "Well, does it matter? Because I'm not having sex with anyone, so there's no need to have any preference. And I like everyone, and have gay friends, and I relate to them strangely, like, as often people who think very differently in the West have the strength of mind to become ordained. So sometimes that means that they're people who are gay, and so there's a stigma with that. And I don't know. I think obviously people have to be protected and advised not to form romantic attachments to people, or this naturally something is going to unfold. And it says that if you read enough about holding vows that don't even look, at certain people, if there's, or don't do certain things, don't even, like, for example, don't let a woman come and get your washing and wash your clothes, because it's creates a kind of a familial or potential start of some kind of friendship that could unfold into. So that's why they have circles of vows, they have root vows surrounded by vows that protect those vows. When you get full ordination, it's mostly that. There's nothing particularly big about the root vows. You already had those, but you get a lot more to train in, because you probably, like, they don't want to put pressure on you when you're a novice. Now, when I came to stay in Watts and I explained who I was, which is a little bit scary sometimes in Thailand, because there are people who were fake, and so like the Puyai Band, like the headman in some country town would come to interview me and check that I could recite sutra and chant and do what prove that I had training, that I wasn't just faking it. And then I would say to the, well, you know, I'm a novice, and there would be like a scandal because in Thailand, novices is like a kid thing, a child thing. They don't really like stay in that state. Whereas so I often go in a roundabout way to make my point, and I apologize. This is about to go like that. In the Tibetan tradition, you have a lot of, as it comes to the West, you have a lot of Lotsawa translators, and translators often get told by their teacher something like, you should get married and not get ordained because it will be better for the Dharma, or, you know, moving to the West or wherever it's going, because you'll have the support of your wife and you won't have the burden of being a monastic, which is a little bit sad, really, because it's not a burden. It's really a beautiful life way to live. In fact, to be honest, having these people in little pictures of people that we're talking in this discussion is my first experience meaningfully talking with other monastics in a very long time, other than like Tenzin called me once, but I was in a bit of a negative state of mind, I think, a while back, talking about something. But whereas this is much more like genuine kind of discussion. So then, all right, so Lotsawas get that advice. But then who else is very important for Dharma migrating to where the West or the rest of the world? Tulkus. So Tulkus may or may not, according to who their root teacher is, also get advised not to be ordained, or to kind of, but then one of the central ways of being a monk is, or nun, is taking on the appearance of being a monk. You're not supposed to just like go in and out of your robes. You're supposed to be like genuine how you present, because you're relying on everyone else knowing what a monk or nun is, and that means that they give you space to do it, right? So whereas Tulkus dress like monks a lot of the time, and they're not, so but they may have a lot of other vows which are considered much more important or special, or so who cares about being a monastic? It's not important. But then from the West, it can be quite scandalous to find that out if you don't have those views of you know, higher views of the, and you know, even within Mahayana, there's all these many traditions with very, very high views. And I heard Tenzin Dasel say some of those, you know, points about what vows really become like when you refine your views up into a much higher level of wisdom. So that's how they look down when you ask the question, are you like having sex? Like, and then it might be scandalous. They might look down and say, well, but my view, and it's my view, and I'm keeping my vows, and who are you, you know, non-Tulku status person to question me? So that doesn't look so good. It seems fine until then you hear the Dalai Lama come out and say, well, that's not good, is it? It's a little bit feudal, perhaps, in certain cases, not all. And I'm going to take before I stop, I don't know if I've answered your question enough, but that you definitely don't want to, if you want to get the free lunch and live in the club and get all the benefits of like earning merit while you sleep, for example, as a monastic, that's a lot of merit. Then you need to keep all the vows intact, and root celibacy is a root vow. So then taking on the appearance of a monk, but not holding that root vow. And you know, I've even heard that, which is something if we're going to talk about this, we might as well open up the deck of cards a little bit. You know, sometimes if people end up having sex out of passion, but then they have deep regret immediately, certain geshes have said, well, that can be healed. That even that root vow there is a potential to restore it if you have very, very serious like regret and wish not to break it or to restore it. It like there's a small amount of time, and I don't know if anyone wants to say anything about that, but there is something there that would matter in the community. I think when Tenzin Dasel talked about monks coming to visit, what's important to note is I assume that what she's saying is the monks live in the monks' quarters elsewhere, and whereas in Rigpa that was not so. Okay, for some time, because of lack of generosity or lack of whatever planning, there were 6 nuns and 3 monks in one building. They had separate locked rooms and everything, but not cool. It didn't lead to anyone breaking any vows. No, those monks and nuns are good people. You know, the saddest thing is that they shunned me because of other reasons. You know, when I left, all kinds of stories were manufactured to discredit me, and so but let's not get in. That's not the point of this. So I'll just drop it there.
Well, I thank you for your sharing. And just to clarify, and just apologies to Tenzin Peljor if the question seemed a bit unclear, because of the sensitive nature of this subject. I was leaving the question of experience relatively open, and so people could share whatever they felt was appropriate and pertinent. And I think, adding to Michael's point, I do hope that tonight's conversation has actually been, in some ways, maybe celebration is too strong a word, but in a way, a reaffirmation of celibacy. We have here all who have continued to have faith in the Dharma and in the 3 treasures, all in our own unique way, whether in lay life or in the monastic roles of teachers, and all having been having our own unique experiences and complexities of thoughts about the issue. And some of you have had your own experiences to share. My understanding is now we don't have audience questions, and that I am being asked to just basically wrap up the main body of discussion. And if there's anything more that our three guests would like to share, please do so. I hope that this talk has been a relatively appropriate but also open and honest springboard into future discussions about the complexities of the Buddhist life, and that celibacy, this is more of a reaffirmation of celibacy rather than any denigration or denial of it. That is absolutely not the intention of tonight's discussion. So I really thank you all for your candid and honest sharing and your experiences. Before we close, if there's anything our three guests would like to conclude, I leave it to you. I don't have any conclusion myself.
I want to just say thank you to everybody for this wonderful exchange and really your deep and courageous sharing of your own experience and that transparency. I would add that in terms of the nuns anyway, and the monks that I'm aware of, the young monks, no one brings them and drops them off at the nunnery or the monastery. All the young nuns let me say at least at Donju Getzeling, where I live with the community for some years, come of their own accord. They ask their families to bring them. And then they're kind of observed for 3 months to make sure that it really is the right fit. And then even after, at any point during their time educating from a young nun up until they're, 20 or 21, anytime they can leave, even later they can leave. And sometimes during the teenage years, I think a few years back, a small group decided they wanted to leave. And so they did. And there was, as it was said, a process to give the robes and the vows back in an appropriate, respectful way. So no one's ever captured into the role of a celibate nun or monk. It's not like that. In fact, families can't just bring any child they want to the nunnery or to the monastery. So there's often on the side of a young person their own wish to know that in this life, this is the path that they want to take, at least within my experience, especially with the younger people coming from Zanskar, the young nuns coming from Zanskar Ladakh, who really tell their families, which is interesting because it's many days away from where the nunnery is. So there is some kind of knowing that in that child's mind, and that young mind, who might be an older mind, that this is the role that they're here to take on in this life. Again, just want to say each of our own journeys is valuable. It is our life. It is our calling. It is our lessons that we're taking. Someone said, the role, I liked what Venerable Tenzin said about, the monks or nuns' life has hardships, and that's good because it reminds us, but every life has hardships. I mean, whether you're even on a spiritual path or not, there's hardships in life. It's part of the deal, it's part of growth. It's part of the journey. So may we all have loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and with equanimity, not holding anyone ever outside of our love. And may the Dharma only be of benefit in all of its myriad ways, and however it's appearing to each of us in our life journey. I thank you for the opportunity and hope that this conversation will have brought benefit.
Anyone else with some final thoughts, or shall I leave it to Shamishka to come back in?
I'm not sure. I think maybe some people expected that we speak also about the difficulties and why there are some scandals there and people cannot maintain the vow of celibacy and what might be the causes for it. So we didn't cover it. It's just making a marker here about this point, because some might have expected we touched this, and maybe this could be a point in the future.
It will be, yes. I think, Tenzin, I understand actually some of the questions I sent were not covered, but mainly because I think it was important overall as we got into the discussion. There were certain points of general clarification on celibacy that we just needed to get out of the way, and unfortunately has taken a little bit more time than we hoped. But I would like to take up your point on the scandals and the struggles. Let's not talk about scandals, struggles, and that I think will be the highlight of a next talk. But that's up to the producers.
Raymond, excuse me for interrupting you, but it's not about the scandals. It's more about the causes and conditions, which makes it difficulty to keep the vow of celibacy. What are supporting factors to help to educate and enlighten people what is needed and why there are these difficulties? So, because if you understand, you are more inclined to help, to support, and you are not so much inclined to condemn and look down on everything which is bad. So your compassion and wisdom is aroused. So that's why I think this would be an important part. So sorry, I just wanted to add this. Thank you.
Producers, you've heard it. You've heard it. We're on track for the next discussion topic. So and again, if there's no further perspective to come, please.
I only want to say, because other people said aspiration. My aspiration is to develop perfect logical reasoning and be free of fallacious logic. And I see the Buddha as a sort of exemplification of that training. So that's where I am at in my path. So I hope I can be logical and directly honest without being offensive in any way. Like, I could have said all kinds of things, but I have respect for the people holding vows all over the world, even if there's a lot of scandals going on. My main issues are just, we could, in the future, I hope we get to talk about the people, as Dasel said, how do you vet your teacher? How do you observe? That's one of the reasons why Patrol Rinpoche is still special to me, because their text contained guidance, and that helped me get free of the situation. So, and then even if you do hold your vows and you don't, and you give your vows back, to Buddha, or however you stop them without breaking a root vow, you can get ordained again a certain number of times. So I didn't. I did try. That's why I disrobed, so that if in future the conditions were right, that I could go back.
Okay. Once more, to all our guests, Venerable Tenzin Dasel, Venerable Tenzin Peljor, Michael, really, thank you so much for joining us. And now I invite Shamishka back in, and she can direct the conclusion.
Thank you so much, Brother Levin. It was very interesting, and thank you so much. I'm very delighted to attend this talk, and it was quite inspiring that all of you have shared all your personal stories very honestly, and personally, I enjoyed this session very much. So, and also we set a good ground for our next sessions, for our coming discussion. So, thank you so much. So, before we conclude, I think there are some announcements. So, let me please do that. So, on the 9th of April 2023, we are going to have a new series called The Victorious Enemy. The moderator will be Ram, and the speakers would be Bem and Brother Bem and Vivek Sharma. So please do join us on this program as well. So yes, before we recite the 4 great vows, I would like to invite our speakers and also the moderator to please recite a short dedication prayer from their respective tradition. So first of all, I would like to invite Venerable Tenzin Dasel.
Thank you. Jangship Semcho Grimboche Make Panam Ke Gyorchi Ke Parnyam Parme Paryango Negondu Pelwar Shog. In English, that sounds like Bodhi mind, precious and sublime, may it arise where it has not arisen, and where it has arisen, may it flourish and grow forevermore.
Thank you so much, Venerable Tenzin. I would like to invite Tenzin Peljor.
For all our merit, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be never be separated from the bliss and joy that is without suffering. And may they abide in great equanimity, free from anger, aversion, attachment, and indifference.
Thank you so much. Michael?
I don't have a formal. I already said. But I do say, know yourself. Buddha would recommend that highly. So that's my aspiration.
Thank you so much. Brother Raymond?
May all beings share in each other's strengths and struggles. May we all come together as a community for the sake of enlightenment and for the liberation of all beings. And may we all be guided towards the Pure Land. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would recite the 4 great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May all beings be well, happy, and safe. Thank you once again to everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you all out there for listening to our discussion. Have a good night.